Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to the Korea Economic Institute. My name is Troy, and I'm the Senior Director for Congressional Affairs and Trade here at KAI. We have what I hope will be a very interesting discussion today. I'm sure many of you in the past have heard much about the chaebol in South Korea and often how successful Samsung specifically has been. We'll often in the press see quotes saying that Samsung accounts for 25% of the Korean economy or some other very significant number. Well, what we're here to discuss today is sort of, what is the role of the chaebol in the Korean economy and how significant is Samsung to a great extent? And for that, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Hyoung Tae Kim here, who will be introducing some new ideas on this topic today that I'm sure you'll find very interesting. Dr. Kim is currently a visiting scholar at the George Washington University School of Business. He also has a position as a visiting scholar at the Asia Pacific Division, at the International Monetary Fund here in Washington, D.C. as well. Prior to joining George Washington University and the IMF, Dr. Kim served as the president of the Korea Capital Markets Institute, which is a nonprofit research organization in South Korea. And he also served as a member of the National Assembly Economic Advisory Council. Dr. Kim has a great deal of economic experience, specifically in the financial area, and so I think we'll have a very interesting discussion today as we look forward to hearing from you. Dr. Kim?
Okay, thank you, Troy. Oh, sorry. That's right. Okay. Thank you, Troy. I'm very pleased and honored to be here this morning. And also thank you for President Manjolo and other staff members of KI for having me here this morning. Today I'm going to talk about some issue about Korean economy. As the title shows, I raised some question and try to find the answers to this question. The question is, does Korea's economy depend too much on Samsung? So in the internet and homepage, it was a little bit revised. Could Korea's economy survive without Samsung? It's the same. It's a very similar, but a little bit different connotation. But original title of my paper is, does Korea's economy depend too much on Samsung? So I want to make clear before my presentation that actually I'm not interested in the private company Samsung. So my background is policy research areas and my interest in policy orientation. But the reason why I touch upon Samsung is that just try to look at the Korean economy at the moment through the lens of Samsung. Why Samsung is so important? So I will make clear and prove that how important the Samsung is. And that has the upside and downsides, so how to take care of these issues, how to deal with this company to boost or bounce back our Korean economic growth. So let me start with the basic motivation of this study. About a couple of months ago, in July, I presented in IMF a similar paper, but the title was, does Korea's economy depend too much on current account surplus? It was macroeconomic issues. This is parallel papers. I'm focused on more on micro issues like Samsung. So motivation of my paper is that Korea has been very famous for its dynamics. So after Korean War 1950s until the 1990s, we have witnessed unprecedented economic growth rate. So at the moment, the total economic size of Korea in terms of total GDP, Korea is number 13th, 14th in the world, and trading volume basis is 6th or 7th. And we also have globally comparative industries like ICT industry like Samsung, and in the global and shipbuilding industries, automotive industries. In shipbuilding industries, top number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 companies are Korean companies. But regardless of domestic and foreign overseas market, many policymakers and businessmen, even the professors and academicians, everybody agrees that currently Korea's economy loses dynamics. Why does this happen? And no matter what is the specific measure of economic growth, Korea's economic growth rate constantly falls down in terms of growth potential, a real growth rate adjusted by the inflation. So today, the Bank of Korea and Minister of Finance and Economy of Korea forecast that 2015, the economic growth rate is below 3%, probably 2.8%. It was unthinkable, 2.2 something economic growth about a couple of years ago. The bottom line is Korea's economy is at a crossroads. Then why this happens? Why lose dynamics? The natural starting point, my idea is that we must start from why we have been so successful in the past. Why so dynamic? Why maintain such a high economic growth rate? That is about Korea's traditional economic model. If we take a look at the Korea's traditional growth model, we have 3 driving force. One is in macroeconomic level is the trading, exporting goods, not services, not capital, just manufacturing goods. In industry level, we specialize in the manufacturing industries, not services, not financial services, whatever. And in corporate level, we have very unique type of corporate structures called the JABL. So Korea has been successful and very dynamic because 3 factors work very well. So if we find that the Korea's economy is different from before and fall down to a low growth trap, that means all of the 3 factors, at least one of them or 2 of them are responsible for it. So we can look, this is very huge and challenging issues we must tackle and approach. But this paper basic idea is to look at the intersection of 3 drivers. If we draw the diagram, then we can find in the intersection we can find one institute, one animal stand out. That is Samsung. That's why I try to look at the Korean economy through the lens of Samsung. So many people, when I was invited by the conference in the Korea, on other U.S., U.K., China, Japan. So I have 2 more asked questions. One is Samsung. Why? The title of this question. Don't you think Korea has been too much dependent on Samsung? Don't you think Samsung has been too much successful? The other question, because my background is finance and I'm a financial economist, second question is why Korea doesn't have Samsung equivalents in financial services industry. So today I will deal with the first questions. So too much reminds me of many issues. Even in the United States, too much government debt, too much tax. So too much is very easy to understand, but this is very subjective, abstract, and sometimes very misleading. And sometimes it provokes very emotional feelings. So my starting point is that to translate this too much question into more specific and concrete and objective, unbiased question. The question is, the most important question, is Samsung systemically important corporation in Korea? The systemically important concept was originally coined by Financial Stability Board. Financial Stability Board is a forum of G20 countries, the governors of central bank, and the ministers of finance economy. So they coined this concept to regulate global bulge bracket financial institutions like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and SICO, and Wells Fargo. because they consider these animals, these financial institutions, as being responsible for the subprime crisis and other systemic risk in the global economy. So, but today, the basic framework I try to apply to Samsung is that the Financial Stability Board but continue to extend the concept of SIFI, Systemically Important Financial Institution. SIFI stands for Systemically Important Financial Institution, and this consistently extend the concept to include non-bank financial institution. They started with the commercial bank. They now, at the moment, they cover non-bank financial institutions like insurance companies, broker-dealers, and asset management companies, even not financial companies, infrastructure companies like payment settlement companies. So my idea is that if that is the case, the argument for this extension of CP concept of FSB and their implementing body IMF is that, yes, systemic risk stems not just from the commercial bank. It might originate from other financial institutions and other institutions. So my idea is that when it comes to systemic risk, we do not have to distinguish between financial institutions and non-financial companies, like manufacturing companies like Samsung. So if that company might bring about the systemic risk. So at first part of this paper, this paper apply the criteria made by the Financial Stability Board to deciding whether a certain company is systemically important or not. So there are 5 criteria. There are big difference in priorities and importance: the size, interconnectedness, and complexity of business model, and global activity, and lastly, the substitutability, irreplaceability. This 5 criteria, FSB decide whether a certain company or financial institution can be classified as systemically important. So first part, I applied this concept for the first time. So the manufacturing companies, Samsung. In the United States, it's very unthinkable to think about systemically important manufacturing companies because, the Apple or Google or Amazon, it takes up just less than 5 or 10% of the market and economy. So if something is wrong, so that does not translate into the systemic risk. But the situation is totally different in other countries. As I will talk about, for example, in Nokia, in Finland, it takes up more than 70% of the economy at that time. So after they collapsed down, the Finnish economy still struggles. So I will apply these criteria to Samsung: size, interconnectedness, and complexity of business model. And the other 2 criteria are secondary importance. I will skip it over. The first, what about size of? So in this section, I will try to prove that Samsung is systemically important. I will decide and analyze whether Samsung is systemically important or not. If that is the case, if that is true, that means Samsung is systemically important, then Samsung should be viewed, treated, and regulated accordingly. That's my basic motivation. First, size. So let's take a look at the market cap, relative market cap of Samsung in Korea Stock Exchange. It takes up about 18% of the Korea Exchange. The 18% of total market cap Korea Exchange. It doesn't give us a sense of how large or how small it is. So let me give you an international comparison. In the United States, the largest market cap company in NYSE is ExxonMobil. It takes up just 3%. In the NASDAQ, the Apple is the largest one. It accounts for around 10%. About 2 years ago, the stock price was record high. It takes up around 11.8%. In the Japan, the largest company is Toyota, automotive company. It takes up about 5%. In China, PetroChina is the largest one, but it accounts for just 5%. In the Germany, and Deutsche Börse, Bayer is the largest one. In France and Sanofi, both companies are pharmaceutical companies. It is amount to just 7 or 6%. So if we concentrate on global top 20 largest exchanges, the Samsung's position is very unique, outlier. It's way above, larger than other companies. Just simple average, the top 20 exchanges, largest company amount to just 8 or 9%. But in the last, so we can see the Teva, Israel pharmaceutical company, it takes up the 30% of the Israel economy. Israel Hebrew exchange, but that exchange does not belong to the top 20 global exchanges. So Korea is, and if we take a breakdown the total GDP of Korea, we can see the very different, very important properties of Korean economy. In consumption, amounts to just 54%. In the United States, consumption constitutes more than 70%. Most countries, more than 60%. In Korea, 50%. Only exception is China. China is less than 50% because China's economy is driven by the investment. And the investments, 26%, government expenditure, 16%, and net export account for just 4%. But the total export is 58% and total import 54%. So 58 minus 54 is 4%. Net export is responsible for only 4%, but total export is even larger than consumption. So if we decide, look at whether the Korean Samsung is systemically important, and in addition to the market cap, we can look at the relative proportions the Samsung takes in the export. So let me make clear the terminology Samsung. I interchangeably use the Samsung and Samsung Electronics. So when I mean the Samsung have dozens of affiliates, so when I mean the total group, I will call this one Samsung Group or Samsung Conglomerate. When I say the Samsung, that usually means the Samsung Electronics. The Samsung Electronics account for about 26% of total export. And Samsung Group altogether is 36. In the market cap, Samsung Group, Samsung dozens of companies, many of them are listed in the Korea Exchange, and altogether it accounts for more than 30%, about 38%. So what does that mean? That means in terms of size, so it's not theoretical issues, it's empirical issues. So how large, how small it is. If you take the average of an international comparison as the valid and justifiable standard, the Samsung's position is very unique. So in terms of market capitalization and also expert position as well, is a systemically important company in Korea. When you talk about market capitalization, we always think about the Nokia. So the stock price is at its highest in 2000 year. Probably I remember in July, it takes up 74% of a Helsinki exchange. That means Finnish economy itself is a Nokia at the time. The stock price consistently plummeted, and in 2013, I guess, it touched down bottom of 7%. It's a yearly basis stock price. So monthly basis, even first down to 4%. After that, bounce back. The Nokia is famous for their transforming capacity, right? They start with a timber company, get transform itself totally as an ICT company. Now, it's not ICT company anymore. They break up. They sold the important part of feature phone, smartphone divisions to other companies. Now, it transformed into certain company. Do you know what? It's a non-performing entity. In user, we call this patent troll. So they have more than 30,000 patents, ICT-related patents. So they doing business with the patent right. So they are not an ICT company anymore. But some people say that, of course, Nokia failed and break up, but their human capital and technology is well preserved and well transferred to other startup companies in Finland. So, for example, Lovio, Supertel. So some people call this successful failure. Yes, in some sense makes sense. But from their macroeconomic perspective, after Nokia burst down, Finnish economy is very shaky, very sluggish, very struggling. Look at the past 4 years, Finnish economy have shown the minus growth rate. And based on the forecast of IMF this year, Finnish economy is expected to show another minus growth rate. So this is just one case, but that means anything. But this implication, of course, if 74% is definitely SICO at the time, but this case of Nokia has very important policy implication to Samsung's case. That's why we began to research on these issues. Okay, second criteria which determines the system important corporation is interconnectedness. So Samsung's main business is, semiconductor industries. I will touch upon other issues. Of course, they produce and may make smartphones, but their core and essential business is semiconductors. So semiconductor industry is typical example of general purpose technology. General purpose technology defined as a technology which is widely applicable, widely used other industries, and it bring about innovations in other industries. The National Research Council of the United States defined a comparable general purpose technologies. They enumerate number one is this one, and semiconductor industry and internet, gas and oil, and electricity is an example of general purpose technologies. So in Samsung, we can break down the semiconductor industry two categories. One is a memory field. It's semiconductor DRAM. Memory to the increasing the memory capacity is the business of the memory semiconductor industry. That's the leading company is Samsung. The other half is the CPU and increasing calculation capacity, intelligence. The best company in the world is Intel in the United States. So all together at the moment, number one is Intel and second one is Samsung. About a couple of months ago, the Samsung used to be the number one. Now the Intel is number one in total, all together memory and non-memory capacities. So this company is the semiconductor is used in every industry requiring memory capacity. So automotive, aerospace, train, whatever, even the home appliances, every item which requires memory capacity that has to use, the company of that item has to use semiconductors. That's why we define the semiconductors as general purpose technology. And second one, the Samsung is interconnected with other company, especially domestic company, is a trickle-down effect. The traditional model, I mentioned at first, the Korean government support the Jebel, the large companies, and they maximize the extent the export to other companies and make the money, and they distribute it to the small and medium-sized companies, other industries, and wages. That is translated into the increase in the consumption. That is the Korean economy has been working. But at the moment, after mid-2000s, this kind of mechanism does not work anymore. That's why Korea is struggling these days. That I will get back to this point in the later. So the performance of Samsung is closely related to that of other SMEs and the subcontractors. And the other one is supply chain. As Samsung is a global company in the domestic and overseas market. It has over 400 customer companies. I mean, wholesale market, not resale market. Over 1,200 supply providing companies. And Samsung is a nationality Korea. When you look at the composition of shareholders, more than 75%, almost 80% is explained by foreign investors. the ownership structure, Samsung is not Korean company anymore. So the third one, criteria to decide whether Samsung is system important, complexity of business model. The very unique feature of Samsung in terms of business model is that it runs both component and set business. In the sense that most of globally comparative ICT company specialize either on the component business or on business. For example, Apple, they produce smartphone, tablet, PC. They specialize in set business. About Intel, they AP, CPU, LCD, NAND, they specialize in the component business. But Samsung, they operate and carry out both of the business. This is unique. I'm not saying that which one is right or wrong or good or bad. That's a fact. So, because Samsung operate both component and set business, very strange thing happens. Samsung, it turns out that Samsung even compete with its client. From the standpoint of semiconductor component division, Apple is one of the largest clients. But from component set business divisions, like a smartphone, is an epic rivalry. They sue against each other. The fierce competition is taking place. So many people think, how long is this business model is sustainable? The one reason is that I will talk about these issues. Until now, Samsung the product quality is so outstanding compared with the price. So even the enemy use this one. But I'm not sure this is how long this business model will go without any difficulties. That even compete with the client. And that's okay. So they operate component business and set business, but of course Samsung Electronics itself does not operate financial business, but Samsung Electronics is indirectly interconnected with financial business, finance activities through the cross shareholdings and circular shareholdings. I mentioned Samsung has dozens of affiliate and sister companies, and many of them are financial companies. So even though Samsung Electronics is a manufacturing company, so through the ownership structure, it is indirectly connected with Samsung insurance companies, Samsung broker dealer, and even Samsung credit card companies. Regardless of manufacturing companies and financial companies, in academics, we call this the conglomerate discount. That means the value of the conglomerate company which runs different kind of business is much smaller than the summation of the value of each divisions. So from Samsung's perspective, for hedging purpose, for diversification purpose, it makes sense. But market doesn't like the complexity and opaqueness. And even the policymakers don't like the complicated business model and complexity, opaqueness, because it's very hard to understand, hard to pick up where the system risk is located. So on top of it, they have complicated business model, but combined with cross-holding, circle holding, and complicated government structures. Altogether, probably that's the Achilles heel of the Samsung. Because Samsung is system important, so this is also a very weak point for Korean economy. So how to handle these issues without threatening the business of Samsung is very policy and business issues in Korea. Okay. So the conclusion up to now is that in terms of size, how large is it, interconnectedness, and compressed business model, Samsung is definitely SICO. System Important Corporation. So SICO has upside and downside. In upside, yeah, they make pivotal contribution to economic growth of a national economy. In downside, they have some chance of bringing about the systemic risk in the national economy. So I would get back to this point in the concluding remarks. And the second part of this paper, my paper, is that the first part is systemic risk related SICO. The second part is to touch upon the upside of the Samsung. So this part will overview and analyze the reasons why the main business of Samsung semiconductor industry, semiconductor technology resonate with Korean people, Korean culture, and Korean education and workforce cultures. First, I will look over the first start from the property semiconductors and look for the key success factors, recipe for success. And I will show you that these key success factors are intrinsically embedded in Korean culture. That's why we have been successful, Samsung, and Korea has been successful in Korea. And in Korea, we have, I'm not sure you ever heard of it. The second largest company is SK Hynix. SK is not ICT company, but it took over the Hynix, a semiconductor company. This is the second largest company in Korea. Size is very almost equivalent to that of Samsung Automotive Company. Sometimes SK Hynix is larger, sometimes Hyundai Automotive is larger. But this company also semiconductor industry, but they only specialize in making semiconductors. So if you take a look at the global top 10 league table, and Hynix is also included. Then lastly, in this section, I will search for another industry which resembles semiconductor industry. I will argue that in semiconductor industry, Korea have many strengths points. So natural to boost up the Korean economy, to make the economy bounce back, we need to search for the sectors and technologies which resembles semiconductor industry. The strong candidate I have in mind is biosimilars, rechargeable batteries in financial sectors and private equity industries. Okay, what are the properties of a semiconductor industry? In nature technology, the change of technology, ever-changing the technology. It's every other year, the technology change. But at one time, the degree of change is incremental, gradual. And this is very sharp. This contrasts sharply with pharmaceutical companies, for example, Merck, Pfizer, BMS. This company, the innovation takes place once in a while, once in 5 years, 4 years. But once that happens, it destroyed all incumbent product technologies, and it take over all the market. So I will compare this to companies. And second innovation is that similarly repeated patterns. This industry is successful replacement. So at the moment, the market standard is a 4 giga semiconductor RAM, but 4 giga market semiconductor RAM does not dominate the market 100%. The maximum, regardless of the innovation, the maximum semiconductor RAM takes up market share is almost 70%. Why? Because always coexist old powers and new coming powers. Well, 3 or 4 technologies coexist always at the same time. That's a very interesting technology, interesting pattern we can witness in the semiconductor industry. And the third property is the innovations are frequently made in production operation. So reason why I mentioned this property is that now I will relate it to the Korean culture and Korean properties. And in pharmaceutical companies, the increase in innovation does not translate into the innovations. Productive increase, the production productivity. And innovation is innovation. They go separately, not go together. But in semiconductor industry, in pharmaceutical companies, most innovations happens in the R&D lab or created by the scientists rather than manufacturers. But in semiconductor industry, the innovation is made in operation production process in the factories. And the other property is that it requires, because the technology is ever-changing, constantly changing, it requires constantly invest huge amount of capital in the facilities. So this is a very important point. So if you look at the industries, semiconductor industry is very unique in the sense that the depreciation cost amount to almost 30%. So next, the largest one, another ICT company is below the 10, most of the industry below 10%, automotive 3%, petrochemical 5%. What does this mean? Because they always invest huge amount of capital, they allocate the capital investment with depreciation year by year, month by month. That automatically translates into the following comparativeness of a company. That means, because if a company, for example, as a Micron produce a semiconductor DRAM 4 giga over 12 months, they need to allocate depreciation costs corresponding 12 months. But if Samsung produce that same semiconductor product in 3 months, then they can apply the one fourth of the depreciation cost to the total cost. That translates into the reduction of the price. That in this industry, because depreciation costs amount to such a huge percentage of the operating cost, the faster and the cheaper. Speed is a vital consideration. Okay, so in biology, the Drosophila melanogaster is nomenclature, but it's a fruit fly. We know that. We biologists, usually evolutionary biologists, respect this animal, this insect, because their lifespan is just few weeks. So we can accumulate data over dozens of generations. So some people call the semiconductor DRAM as a fruit fly in the technology evolutions. Okay, this picture shows the striking features semiconductor industry. The maximum in the left-hand side, the maximum market share is less than 70%. Always, regardless of the technology or product, they always similar pattern repeat itself. This is a market share. The right-hand side graph is a Rogers function for accumulated market share. We cannot think of negative market share is constantly growing. But in the paper, I estimate the specific form of this function based on the real data. Okay, this is an extension of period from 1991 to 2014 for 25 years. The pattern of market share change exhibit the similar patterns, regardless of the technologies and product. And I contrast these pharmaceutical companies, because in pharmaceutical companies, BT companies, their innovation plays a role of entry barrier, because the productive increase is not translated into the innovations. They're looking at the top 10 ranking about 15 years ago or 25 years ago, but compare with top ranking companies of 15 years ago, 9 out of 10 companies are still in top 10, global top 10 league table. Even 25 years ago, the 6 companies are still in the top 10. But what about semiconductor industries? So only about, in the past, only the 5 companies, Intel, Toshiba, Texas Instruments, Samsung, the Micro still remains in the top 10 league table. Compared with 25 years, only 3 companies survives a long period. Texas Instruments, Toshiba, and Intel. In the 1990s, Samsung didn't belong to the top 10 league table. That means because of the difference in nature of technology, there is a huge difference in the incumbency, the power of incumbent companies. So taking all these properties, features, semiconductor industry, we can derive the following key success factors. First, I mentioned, touch upon briefly, the speed is a vital consideration. The faster the investment, the faster person, the cheaper the price. So the capital and second, move in perfect order. Semiconductor industry has a very simple and single business target: to maximize memory capacity, and sometimes reducing the memory, the chip size. They're very simple. It's different from the very complicated, sophisticated target, just like the product of Apple and complex companies, pharmaceutical companies. They're very simple. So moving perfect order is one of the key success factors. The other one is that, as I mentioned, the faster and cheaper. The innovation operation process is very important to make it expedite and accelerate it. This is, I have no time, but I think the Samsung, Apple, we can compare Samsung, Apple, and Amazon. In traditional viewpoint, Samsung and Apple compete with each other, belong to the same industry. But I think that the way the company create the value and create their global competitive is, then Samsung and Amazon is very similar. In both countries, both companies, the speed is a vital consideration. So you ever use the Prime service of Amazon, I fully satisfied. No matter when, no matter what item I ordered, I can receive it in 48 hours, in 2 days. It's amazing. So some people are complaining about services, Samsung, Intel, Apple, even the Facebook, Google, but I have never met any people who complain about the service of Amazon. It's a great company. And also, and the owner's name is Jeff Bezos. He defined this Amazon company as an infrastructure company. I don't understand at first time why does it happen? Why is it an infrastructure company? It's an internet-based selling company. But I realized that they have very high technology robot and delivery system to keep the promise with the customers, to make all the process. They constantly invest in the infrastructure for delivery system instead of semiconductor production system. So both guys are very similar. Okay, this comparison, let's skip it over. So why this semiconductor industry has these properties and can drive the key success factors? Why? Why does Korea, especially among other industries, they successful in this industry? Because this is the last question. These key success factors for the semiconductor industry have always been embedded. It's my argument. So it's very hard to support this argument of beta, but this is my intuition. But first, in education, Korea is famous for their hard training education. It's the repetitions. Target is very simple and clear. So they work hard. After school, they private lessons, similar pattern repeat itself. So the percentage of high school graduate who enter the college is around 80%. 80%, not 18. It's way above the number one in the world, followed by Israel and Finland and Japan. And they have pressures. So the students, from teenagers, Korean students already get used to work on the hot pressure and repeated patterns. On top of it, military service. In Korea, a military service is an obligation by constitutional law. So every male will have to deliver this service. So what the military service is about? If the officer designates the target, is that the soldiers must do is go for it. Get it under any circumstances. To this end, aiming at this repetition, trained repeatedly the same things. Because in the battle, you cannot have time, because I completed my military service, because no matter how smart you are, that does not matter in the battle space. You have no space, no time to think intelligently. All the actions, all the way of thinking should be embedded in your body. That's why the repetition is important in training in the military service. And this is also reflected in the workforce culture in Korea. It's long hours, very disciplined. In disciplined culture is not good, the company like Apple's, right? They more originality, creativity, not constantly moving, constantly taking place, innovations. In that company, take time, be lazy is more important. But in the semiconductor industry, discipline is a good corporate culture. Okay. So lastly, I talk about which company, which industry or technology resembles semiconductors. The strong candidate is biosimilars. Yeah, I talk about original biopharmaceutical companies. Biosimilar means is an industry which copy the original biologics drugs, but it unlike generic industry. Generic drug means it's just a replication of chemical composition of the drug, but this is a biosimilar, different one, upgraded one. To achieve the similar effectiveness, they need to come up with device, creating their own manufacturing operating process. This is very similar in terms of they have very similar target, single target, because they do not have to worry about target because original target drug is already exist. When they expires, then they enter into the market. The U.S. government, the Korean government, every government try to encourage this biosimilar business because original bio is important, but this is too expensive. Only an exceptionally small percentage of company enjoy the special treatment. But how to make it widespread, make it popular, more people enjoy, make it cost down. This is what biosimilar industry about. So Korea, the most famous I think it's lucky for Korea. The most important biosimilar company is not Samsung. It's the largest market cap company in Kosdaq, Celltrion. And this and the rechargeable battery industry and this display industry. Then private sectors, private equity fund is a similar patterns because in private equity funds, you can modularize the step first. They take over the company, buy out the company. After that, change the incumbent management, board representation, and financial injection, breakup, and exit. They repeat the same similar protection over and over again. So in the paper, you can see the basic logic why this industry is close to semiconductor industry. Time constraints. Okay. So this is an interesting league table. So I think the private equity fund very similar to semiconductor industry. And the pharmaceutical companies have a strong incumbent power. It's very similar to the commercial bank industry. Look at the global rankings, investment banking, almost except the Lehman Brothers, everything still survive. But private equity fund is a significant number of private equity houses changed. So concluding remark. Yes, in terms of size, interconnectedness, and complex business model, every standard and criteria, Samsung is system important corporation in Korea. So to be classified as SIFI, system important financial institutions, a company financial institution do not have to satisfy all the conditions. If we meet one condition at least, that will be classified as SIFI. But in Samsung Electronics satisfied all three SIFI conditions. So Samsung should be viewed and watched out and regulated accordingly. That does not mean that government step in every process of business of Samsung. Let Samsung have been taken care of itself so well, so successful. Let it go. Let Samsung take care of itself, except two things, which I think closely related to the systemic risk of Korean economy. First, systemic risk is that too much market power, monopoly. So they discourage the young generation startups to coming into the market. So a good example is regulation of IBM in the U.S. Anti-Monopoly Act in 70s, 80s. If the government does not step in to regulate IBM, we cannot see such a splendid, gorgeous company like Microsoft. Exactly the same thing happened here. If we do not regulate and speed up regulate the too much power of Microsoft, we cannot witness Amazon, Apple, or Facebook, Google. So exactly the same thing must happen in Korea. So we regulate Samsung not because they are doing bad job, because they are doing good job. So to maintain the hope and business spirit, entrepreneur spirit of the younger generation, we need to regulate Samsung in this regard. The second one, this is a point I'd like to emphasize strongly. But Samsung, they run both loan and settlement business. A lot of items, that's okay. It's up to Samsung. But if the system important corporation, Samsung Electronics, is interconnected with financial risk through the shareholdings, ownership structures, that's not justified. So my recommendation is Samsung separate financial affiliate and manufacturing affiliate altogether. I do not mean that Samsung is not supposed to run the financial business. Do it. It's private company. It's up to Samsung. But do it without being interconnected between manufacturing and financial affiliates. The idea is that the most efficient way is to separate these groups into two groups of two groups of holding company. One is Samsung Electronics centered manufacturing holding company, and the other is a Samsung Insurance company focused and centered and financial holding company. So you can do this, separate these ones. And semiconductor-like countries, so Korea economy is looking for desperately the growth engine for next generation. So we can search for the sectors we have a competitive edge. I think semiconductor resembling industries, biosimilars, rechargeable batteries, displays, and private equity house industry has a very promising area. Then last question is there any alternative to Samsung in Korea? Okay, Dr. Kim, okay, regulate. Samsung might bring up a system risk. You regulate Samsung. Then what's about Korean economy? Is there any alternative to Samsung? At the moment, the answer probably negative. And it depends on how we define the survivorship of the Korean economy. In terms of economic growth, after Nokia broke up, first down, Finnish economy struggles. But the government didn't file for the bankruptcy. They still survive. They will try to bounce back. If that is a survive, then without Samsung we can survive. But if our expected standard is a positive growth rate, at the moment it's hard to find the alternative. But important point that I'd like to emphasize is that does not necessarily mean that there's nothing for government to take care of these issues. So it's probably Samsung might feel uncomfortable with these issues, especially separating financial issues, because we touch upon these issues not because Samsung's problem is not limited to Samsung itself. It might spread into all of the economy. That's what we are afraid of. So before the problem becomes serious, we must take care of these issues. Thank you.
So, Dr. Kim, thank you for an excellent presentation. It's a very interesting paper. You've done something that sort of tries to force us to think about things in a different way. I'd like to maybe, before opening up to the audience, ask you a couple questions along those lines. You've introduced this new concept of the systemically important corporation, and you've talked about, issues such as size, interconnectedness, and complexity. Yes, thank you. But I guess the one thing we haven't talked about really is sort of, the behavior and the risk factor from behavior. If we look at, because this concept grows out of the concept of the SIFIs, and if we look at, the banking industry, since the financial crisis, there's been efforts to sort of ring fence a lot of the investment sides of banks and everything. And so from a systemic point, it was the behavior, how loans were repackaged, and the lack of clarity in that in terms of, counterparties that led to a lot of the crisis. So I guess my question would be is sort of, thinking in that context and everything, if a large bank that is simply giving loans and holding people's money isn't necessarily overly risky per se, but it's more the investment nature and some of the more modern products, is there anything you see either in Samsung itself or the chaebols in general that is inherently risky in their behavior in terms of how they operate?
A kind of source of systemic risk of the management company. Right. Systemically important concept is best suited to financial institutions because financial institutions, commercial bank in particular, is a kind of financial industry itself is a typical example of general purpose technology. No companies, no industries cannot survive without financing. But the difference is that the difference lies in the degree, not a substance. It's a matter of degree, not a substance. For example, in Korea, during our Asian crisis in 1997, we have very hard time. Finally bounced back, but we have hard time because it was triggered by some second largest conglomerate was collapsed, had problems. The name was Daewoo. It has nothing to do with the financial institutions because they spread all of the business, all of the global economy. They high leverages. So much closely interconnected many manufacturing subcontractors, small and medium-sized entities. So when it comes to systemic risk, I think the financial institution is very clear. But if power and business is so much concentrated on one company or one industry, then my diversity matters not just for investment, portfolio management, but the national economy's management of an industry and company. So that kind of thing happens. Especially as for the Samsung, this point is important because in the past, the Korean economy and policymaker, government, and public and people in general accept that high risk. Well, if Samsung has problems, so we can. Government has every incentive to step in and bail it out, and with taxpayers' money, nobody like it. But about 20 years ago, Korean people probably would accept it, that proposal as a government. But now, I think, don't even think about it. No way. Because I didn't mention because time constraint, but Samsung has a significantly important in revenue generating, value creating, but in generating employment in domestic market, it plays less and less important role. In global world, in global economy, Samsung employed more than 310,000 employees, a huge company. In domestic market, how much do you guess? It's less than 100,000 people. Domestic employment is expanded less than one third. And on top of it, if we look at the job creation made last year, 2014, Samsung newly employed 50,000 employees last year. In domestic market, only 5,000. Remaining 45,000 was made in China, Vietnam, the US, and all of the economy. So even in Brazil, Samsung Electronics was selected as the best employment generating company in Brazil last year. But now, when people, wow, what happened to Samsung? Okay, they make money, stock price. It's good for the shareholders and owners. What's the benefit to the Korean economy? So that is a system. This is not an economic issue, but the most important source of system risk Samsung has to handle comes not from the outside, but from the inside domestic market. This employment issue, regardless of country, even in the United States, UK, China, Japan, all countries, now it appears to be the most important economic issue, employee generating capacity. So in that sense, the public opinion is not as favorable as before. So even I think financial institution more important in terms of systemic risk, but that we cannot, if a company plays a so significant, takes up so much position in the market and industry, I think that will have high chance to bring about the systemic risk.
Then the one other question I have for you relates to really sort of the size issue. I mean, it's interesting to see, when you had the chart up of all the stock market values, Samsung and then Teva in Israel, significantly larger than other companies in terms of market share on the exchange. But I guess the question would be is, we've talked about Samsung, but what about the other chaebols? Should they fall? They have complexity, they have interconnectedness, and if we, look once again, sort of at the financial crisis in the United States, both the Bush and the Obama administrations felt the need, due to the impact on the U.S. economy and on the manufacturing sector, to basically bail out the U.S. auto industry, which was significantly smaller in comparison than Samsung is to Korea. So, is this something to where Samsung is sort of the most prominent example of something that should be looked at more broadly?
Yes, Samsung is the way above large company in Korea. The second largest chaebol is Hyundai, probably, and SK Hynix and G. But it takes a little look at the market capitalization. It takes up about 4 or 5%. So, yeah, similar thing happens to Hyundai, other chaebol groups. But I selected Samsung in this paper because this is so outstanding. It stands out in terms of everything. And the reason the U.S. government stepped in and bailed the General Motors,
And
bailed out
Chrysler. General Motors and Chrysler.
General Motors and Chrysler, because because of employment issues. So the more, I think that if a company employs, for example, 1 million people, I think 100% the government has incentive to step in. 100 voting right. The politicians cannot disregard their companies. So in the future, in Korea, more and more voices are made by each interested group and people. So that means there is more higher probability that the government should step in, bail them out. So in proportion to the possibility, we need to impose more stronger, stricter regulation ex ante to avoid the possibility of bailing out or injecting taxpayers' money. That is justified. That the more the probability is the government's stepping is justified.
All right, I'd like to open it up to the audience now. We'll have mics coming down the sides. If you could identify yourself by your name and your affiliation. Yes. Oh, if you could just wait for the mic real quick. Thank you.
I had a question about China and in relation to Samsung. So much was made this year of slowing handset sales by Samsung and the sort of cheaper handsets being manufactured in China. I was wondering, how do you indicated, and it was very helpful, how quickly the rankings can change. How concerned are you that the Samsung ranking could change due to companies that are due to Chinese manufacturers?
Okay. I'm not sure the management of Samsung, the shareholders of Samsung, has similar opinion with me. But I think the essential business, core business of Samsung is semiconductor business, rather than smartphones. Okay? From Samsung's perspective, it's a diversification. If you look at the past, if Samsung has problems and struggles in smartphone, then the revenues made by the semiconductor maker for it, and vice versa. But I think comparing the technology and the global competitiveness, I think is totally different. Smartphone is a complete world Apple's and other set companies, Chinese company, Huawei, domestic companies. So I think they continue to struggle. But if you research and analyze more in detail on semiconductor industries, the technology gap between Samsung's technology and second best one, but it's huge, more than enough. I think Samsung has no problem at least 10 years. After that, for the semiconductor based on semiconductors. So if some company come up with some innovative different materials, not semiconductors, then total landscape will change. So the problem, this is the logic. This year, Chinese government announced that it will support semiconductor companies. Why does that happen? The Huawei made an export many smartphones to US, even to Korea, many countries. But if we break down the profit and cost analysis, the more they sell to the other countries, the more monies come to the Samsung because they use the Samsung semiconductors. That is about general purpose technology is about. And Samsung, so considering the technology of Samsung, probably the division head of smartphone, Samsung, totally disagree with me. But probably smartphone may have some problems and struggles. But semiconductors are definitely number one. So probably, I'm not sure, it depends on how. But semiconductor industry, more and more companies industry will be required. So I'm not sure. I'm very positive and optimistic about semiconductor industry, at least. But this year, smartphone barely make profit, but semiconductor huge amount of money. More and more Huawei, more and more emerging countries, smartphone makers use Samsung because Samsung is highly sophisticated, so should be expensive. But I explained before, the faster the cheaper logic. So make it cost down. There's a huge entry barrier in the semiconductor industry. So I can survive. Samsung, I'm positive of semiconductor industry at least.
The gentleman right here.
I'd like to go to a higher degree of resolution, a finer degree of resolution when you talk about the semiconductor industry. Much of what you've talked about is the planar semiconductor industry with field effect transistor and silicon dioxide. As you probably know, in the last decade, the industry has made a very hard transition, just replacing the silicon dioxide gate oxide. And so there are lots of small things that are getting harder and harder. And so I wonder whether extrapolating from the era of the 80s, 90s, and the first part of this century, where we were able to stick to Moore's law fairly easily, to the situation where you're going to have to go three-dimensional, where you have to have these complicated oxides and stuff like that, whether the traditional model may work as well.
I'm not expert in electronic engineering, so dioxide, right? DRAM, yeah. Dioxide. Right. I'm not familiar with that concept, but yes. So I think I'm not in the right position to answer the question. Actually, frankly, I don't know what's happened to technology. But basic logic is that the Samsung is extending their semiconductor items based on the semiconductor DRAM, AP, or NAND, and other items. And the most important goal of the business is extending and maximizing capacity, at the same time making it smaller. So a couple of months ago, I wrote a column, and the Korean newspaper said it's not about Samsung, but I recommend Samsung to employ the architect, the Frank Gehry, like famous worldwide Frank Gehry, to invite them invite him to make the semiconductor more efficiently, make it smaller. So now I'm not sure, I'm not good at this, I'm not expert in this area. They accumulate the horizontal planes of like this. Now they transform into make it more vertical, or 3D, right? So why don't more, it's a provocative recommendation, but why don't you invite Frank Gehry and design more efficiently to make more and more memory capacity in a smaller space? Sorry.
Yes. If you could just.
And thank you so much for an actually fascinating discussion. My question with Nokia, I absolutely agree with you. Nokia is one of the most tremendous company able to transform itself from timber company to rubber company and IT, now basically owned in patent company. My question with regard to your remark in Finland, of course, yes, you're absolutely right. When I look at economic outlook in Finland, it doesn't look good. And I absolutely agree with you. This one of the problem is diversification. But I wonder whether it's anything to do with one of the Finnish largest trading partners is Russia. And of course, we had a problem with the sanction issues. And of course, another factor is the slowdown European economy. And I was wondering whether two factors also contribute to slowdown of Finnish economy. Thanks.
Yes, the question is, the comment is a very good comments. I agree. Yes, depend too much on Russia, right? Korea is a different story, but Korea depends more and more on China these days. China is, in terms of export and import, is the largest trading partner. It takes up about 26 or less than 30%. About 10 years ago, the largest trading partner was U.S. Now there is China. So in everything, so in technology, diversification, even the diversification of industry, technology, national economies, then diversification matters. But if Finnish economy depends too much on Russia, Russia has some problems. So Russia has also SIFI, Gazprom is a public company, but Gazprom is a definitely SIFI. SICO, not a financial company. So that's the one reason why Finnish economy struggles. But the point I have in mind is that, yes, startup companies and small and medium-sized companies complement the large driving force of economy, large company, and at least partly replace the large driving force. But at the short time, they cannot totally replace the larger companies. Could you tell me any other country which totally depends on small and medium-sized enterprise? They are very important. They coming back, grow up to the large company, but no large company, only small company sustain and maintain the economic growth of company. I cannot see any other country that structure. Even the Deutschland, in the Mittelstand is small and medium-sized company, but this plays a more important role. It's a matter of degree, a percentage. More important role Mittelstand, but Deutschland has very globally competitive large companies, BILs and large mechanical companies. Right.
Yes.
Hi, this is Gianco from Atlantic Council. Actually, I have question dealing with the social responsibility of Samsung, because I just got much sense that concerning size, complexity of business, and interconnectedness, Samsung is really big deal in Korea. And do you think Samsung take enough social responsibility to domestically, and do you really believe that is taking social responsibility really helpful to build healthy economy? Yeah, that's my question.
Frankly speaking, I don't like the word social responsibility from the part of private company. This is not, Samsung is a totally private company. not non-profit company or public companies. So social responsibility, yeah, it's more journalistic or more emotional touch. It's important, but that's a secondary importance. If we do the good job in business, technology development, after that, add to that, in addition to that, they can also provide more social responsibility. That's okay. But social responsibility cannot replace the business strategy, business success. Doing business well, if possible, to generate more employment in domestic market. Yes, you can define it as a kind of social responsibility. Yeah, yes. But what you mean by social responsibility is donations or make funds. I think that's not an efficient way. Make more employment. Important.
Samsung's employment
Peter,
90% overseas. So
Last year,
90% of Samsung's new employees were overseas. So if they're not creating jobs at home, then isn't social responsibility important both in Korea and internationally to show that Samsung is a responsible player? I mean, if you, of course, making a profit is number one for a company, but I think most global companies place great importance on social responsibility. But that was just to challenge you on that. But I'm wondering, how would you characterize the government's relationship, particularly under Park Geun-hye, with Samsung and the other Jabil? At times they seem to be antagonistic and Jabil leaders being put in jail and put on trial, and other times they seem friendly. So I'm wondering how you would characterize relations.
And if I could just add another aspect to Peter's, the first part
I'm
of his
sorry, I'm
question.
Peter Beck with the International Conference.
But, in terms of the SICO concept, how does it change, or does the concept change at all? I mean, we've talked about how Samsung is now having a much larger impact outside the Korean economy rather than directly inside. So as Samsung becomes larger but more global,
Right.
I mean, is it still, does the SICO concept still apply? Or if it's contributing a smaller and smaller amount directly into the Korean economy, but it's still large, does it then become less risky?
Okay, good point. In defining the SIFI, system important financial institutions, there are two kinds of SIFIs. One is global SIFI, one is domestic SIFI. So Financial Stability Board defines the global bulge bracket SIFIs, and it's up to each government to designate the domestic SIFI. In United States, in U.S., the authority Financial Stability Oversight Council is a government body which is authority to designate and classify the SIFI in the United States. They designate General Electric as a SIFI, 2013. So Samsung's traditional reference of GE, somebody asked blind Samsung, why you even operate the financial business? Then Samsung replied, yeah, look at the GE. They're all doing the financial business. But this year, June, what's the CEO name? Jim Melt announced that GE finally decided to carve out, spin up all the financial business to focus solely on the manufacturing business. So that's a good reference, and this is another, not yours. So what I mean here, SICO is just a domestic SICO, what I mean. So I do not cover the international impact, the international significance at this paper. But if global SICO is concerned, then we can think of many other companies except the Samsung. So I will solely focus on SICO, domestic SICO. So I just concentrate on domestic issues. But that's correct. That's what international company, globalized company is all about. They employ, they produce the product, they employ the laborers they want, same capacity in a low price. That's what they are making profit company. But I'm not saying that that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with the Samsung, but it's a kind of dilemma that Samsung has to take care of or deal with. Because to make more and more profit, to increase the value, just to satisfy the shareholders' needs, they need to recruit people in all over the world, all over the place, low cost, high quality. And it turns out that it ends up creating smaller and smaller percentage of creation in domestic market. But this is a kind of not rather than economic issues, it's a political issues. The government, as opposed to Park Geun-hye government, I was a member of the advisory board of the President of Korea in President Lee Myung-bak presidency, but not for Park Geun-hye. I'm not exactly remember what her position is, but she's from the conservative position. She is readily friendly to Samsung. But when she was a candidate for president about 3 years ago, one of his catchphrase was, "I will renovate. I will totally revamp the Jabil." I don't think she has been successful up to now as well. I'm not sure what renovation revamp means by her, but many people say after that. Because the logic is that if we totally dependent of Jabil, large groups, if we tackle them, if we feel them more comfortable, they might have a detrimental negative impact on the Korean economy. That's the logic. Okay, that's true, very true. But because of that, is that their incumbent power is more and more increasing, so we need to take care of it. So I think the only time we can revise or revamp this more negative side of Jabil is the just first year of the new presidency, of the new president. Because in Korea, in the United States, you can do the dual terms, 4 years, 2 times, so 8 years. In Korea, because history dependent, we have very bad history of dictatorship. So the constitutional law specify that only single term, only 5 years. So that means as soon as he or she is elected as president, it starts lame duck. I think that's the problem in Korea. So I'm not a politician, I'm not a political academician, so I'm not that interested in politics. But why don't we make it 2 terms of 4 years like United States? Then the president has a long enough time and have an incentive to show you a big performance, to re-elect it. But we have you know what? I don't know. But we have history dependent. I think that short term, I think is I try to call this, to express it journalistically, I try to call this 5-year trap of Korea. 5-year trap. Elected, the opposition party tackles a tech company because the less the incumbent power is popular, the more higher probability their party will make the new president in the past. So many stakes, many interest groups are at stake. I think that's why I call the Korean economy is at a crossroads. A hard time, but I hope we'll address these issues good and bounce back once again.
All right, one last question, and then we'll have to conclude.
Hi, my name is Minjin Chen. I'm from International Student Conferences, and my question is, what has Samsung's reaction been to your recommendation? How have they reacted so far?
Probably this argument is not proposed in public. Everybody knows that there is some problems in their ownership structure. I mean the cross-holding. Cross-holding, special case of cross-holding is circular shareholding. Circular shareholding means A company owns, for example, 10% of B. B company owns 20% of C. C company, once again, owns the 20% A company. Why they do this? Because they're leverage effect. With a small amount of equity capital, they can control all of the huge amount of companies. They just cut down it. It's not clear. This is contagious. If something is good, there is normal time, no problem. If something bad happens, it's contagious. It's spread all over the company. So cut it down. But it takes time. But it requires a huge amount of money. They maintain this position not because it's right, but because it's very hard to implement it. But start it step by. I want to see the total difference overnight. But let's do it by step by doing. Samsung's response, I don't know. I never talk about this issue to Samsung, but probably they don't like my idea. But I'm not interested in Samsung. I'm not talking about the Korean economy. I selected Samsung not because I like it, not because I hate it, just because it's system important. I try. If the name is Hyundai, Samsung, that the company's name is KEI, I would have collected the KEI.
Well, you've heard it here. We're systemically important. And with that, I would like to thank you, Dr. Kim, for a very interesting discussion. And this is, a topic I'm sure we'll be talking about going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.